Grief is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of a new chapter. Welcome to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm the founder of the Empower Grief Journey coaching and podcast platform. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing and transformation. Each episode brings real conversations with people around the world who have navigated grief and discovered the strength to create new and inspired beginnings. You'll discover how to walk from loss to empowerment through powerful storytelling and actionable insights that will guide you towards a future filled with courage and hope. On today's episode, we're talking to Simona Costantini. She's the founder and CEO of Volt Productions, a lead podcast production agency producing over 20 shows weekly, many ranking in the top 30 to 100 in their niches. She helps business owners and entrepreneurs amplify their voice, grow their impact, and turn their passions into thriving platforms. As the host of Happiness Happens and as it relates to podcasting, Simona blends mindset shifts with actionable strategies. Off the mic, she enjoys wine country life and her cockapoo Gus. And so without further ado, Simona, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm so excited to be here.
And for listeners, Simona and I connected many, many months ago, and both of our lives took us in total different directions. And I'm very excited that we get to finally reconnect and make this happen today.
I know,
So
me too. We were just sitting and I'm like, oh my goodness, it has been. I was like, what's it been a couple months? And then I'm like, no, it's actually, we were like, no, it's been probably more than 6 months at this point, which is so crazy. It's so interesting. And maybe someone can relate to this, but it's so interesting how everything and nothing changes all at the same time, you know?
that's a powerful statement. I love that.
Started off with a bang.
Well, that's a great segue into what grief is like because there's things that go right and things that go wrong at the same time as we go through grief in a life. And it always changes and evolves and it always grows. And so we never
Mm,
really know, if there's an endpoint to grief or not. But sometimes it's just a journey that puts us on a path that we never saw coming. And so,
100%.
so Simone, I'd love to start the podcast with you telling listeners a little bit more about yourself and also telling us a little bit about your grief journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you said it so beautifully in the bio. I mean, I run a production agency. I haven't always done that though. I worked in corporate for a number of years, like over 10, 12 years in marketing and PR, media, advertising, ad buying, and all that, and kind of just followed your typical traditional path in life to get there, which is always great. And then, that's awesome. And then kind of woke up one day and realized, like, hold on, is this really the life that I wanted for myself? Am I in the place where I really think I could thrive if I were to continue down this path? And am I making active and conscious choices for myself based on the type of life that I want to live? And if I think of a grief journey, my grief journey overall, I don't think of one single moment that was a huge catalyst, if that makes any sense. I look at it as kind of grief is something that coexists in the fabric of our lives. It's something that's woven in so many different ways because there's so many different types of grief out there. You have, grief of someone who's passed away. You can also grieve the life that you thought you wanted and then, didn't want anymore. There's those little griefs that come in when you didn't get the job that you thought you were going to get, or an animal that you thought you were going to adopt, maybe you didn't get, or, maybe for me, if you will, I had this cat for 20 years and she was literally the cat that I grew up with from being a child, like a baby. And losing her was a certain amount of grief. And so when I think back to it, there's definite like key moments of grief, but there isn't just one. There's so many of them. I lost my cousin when I was 17, and that was quite shocking because he was sick, he had cancer, and no one really tells you what to do in that time or how to process emotions like that. And that's heavy for, someone at 17 to go through and younger. Um, I even before that had a friend in high school who passed away from an unexpected car accident over a lunch break and he died. Like that was shocking. I think I was 15. And so, between those two, I feel like I was introduced to grief pretty early on. Um, And even, if I think back even before that, I have a family member. I won't go into details because they like me to keep it private, but I had a family member who was sick as a kid, and that was traumatic, right? But then there's also the complexities of how do you navigate something as a family versus by yourself. So there's so much to unpack when it comes to just the topic of grief. And I think if we look at our lives as a whole and we look at who we are as people and then all the things that we've gone through, you can be someone like myself, let's say, who looks at life through rose-colored glasses, who looks at life with a more positive spin. I've always been that person. And also, you can go through really deep traumatic experiences that shape the way in which you live your life. And I think we have the ability to take all of the experiences that we go through and we can use them for good if we want to. But it's not easy to do that, you know? And then I'd say, like, the most recent grief was when I got a divorce after being married for a year, which you wouldn't typically do. Because then there's a whole other facet of that of like, I've just let down my whole family and the relationship that we were in. And, I very like unconsciously chose a life that just wasn't in alignment. So it's like, how do you navigate your expectations with everyone else's expectations? And when other people tell you this is not a good thing, but it's a good thing for you, you have that inner conflict, right? So you say the word grief and, grief story, but I feel like in the least depressing way possible, life is filled with grief. There's so much grief around us every single day, and we're continuously having to navigate that like time and time and time again. And so when people say, "Oh, I haven't really gone through anything," like if you actually look at your life, you probably have. And but I think it's also like a common thread that we can all relate to one another, and you would hope that it would give people more empathy for one another, but I don't know that it does.
Well,
What are your thoughts? I just gave you so
you
much. Let's
know,
unpack.
I love what you said, by the way, because I've yet to talk to a guest on my show that's brought up that grief is in many facets of our life and in many
Mm.
ways. And you gave such a beautiful testament to that, even at a young age, from 15 to 17 to wherever you are today. I don't like to ask age, but I'll just say where
I'll
you're
be
at today
34 in
went through.
December.
All
I
right,
don't
cool. So
care. You know what?
we're
I
not too
have
far
to.
apart.
But you know what though, Chris? I love that. And you know why I like to share that? Because everyone's always like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to share my age or this or that." And yeah, sure, for a lot of reasons, I think maybe a lot of people can get backlash online of, you ever seen those trends online where people are like, "Oh, how old do I look?" And they're like 34 and they actually look like they're 50, and then people roast them on social media. Like I don't know if you've seen that, but I think about it, and I've always been so grateful to be able to turn a year older. I've always been so grateful to be able to experience this year in its fullest through the highs and through the lows. And the family member that I was mentioning before, that happened when I was like 11 or 12. You know what I mean? So that's quite a young age to go through that. And also, my parents separated. They got a separation and a divorce when I was like 11 or 10 or so. I don't even remember how old I was. And so it's like life has this way of giving you the experiences that you need, even though you don't understand in the moment why you're going through them. But it's always made me, especially losing people that are close to you, it's made me look at getting to go through life with so much gratitude because you get to turn a year older. Like, why are we going to shy away from that? Like, that's such an exciting thing to be
Yeah.
able to celebrate, you know?
Well, I think what's hard is we're trained in society in this way of like, oh, you're going to reach this point where you're old and now you don't have as much time left. And see how it always goes negative path really quickly, like you're going to
Totally.
die sooner. And I think
Totally.
that, what you were talking about earlier as we started the podcast, I think is such a beautiful thing because we do grieve in many aspects of life, whether that's losing a family member, losing a pet, losing a best friend, losing a job, losing a house, moving. Just right out the gate, we experience so much loss all the time. But the problem why people get stuck, by the way, and don't ever get out of grief at times is
Mm,
because we're not given the tools and the resources and the knowledge of how to move through grief because we're taught
mm.
to take a painful experience, chuck it away, don't talk about it, don't think about it, move on, let go, get over it. And unfortunately, we're
Or don't
human,
move on, or
don't
don't
move
move
on.
on and don't
Yeah,
get
and
over it.
And we're human beings, right? All of us are. We're emotional people
Hmm.
all the time. And so I sit there and I say, how dumb is that we've been telling society to do those things when reality land we live over here? And by
Hmm.
the way, if we allowed people to go through their grief and feel their grief and acknowledge it for whatever it is, that phrase of hurt people would not happen so often. And in fact, it would be drastically reduced because people would find the meaning, as I like to say, the gifts, lessons, and blessings through grief. That grief doesn't always have to be this terrible, tragic, awful thing in your life. In the moment it was, in the time it was. But now that you're out here and you're healing and you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do in life, like you said about leaving corporate world, you're in a place where you're forced to reflect and you're forced to say, I can go this way or this way. And why not choose the that's more joyous?
Exactly. Well, it can be challenging to do that, right? Because you want to choose the path that's more joyous. And that's exactly where I was when I chose to um leave my corporate job and then start my agency, right? Like that's a choice. And then there's also like the grief that is kind of woven into that in some ways too, right? Because you go to a job every single day, you get to see your coworkers every single day. You have a certain life that you've created for yourself that goes away when you start working for yourself and you work within your own four walls. And I don't know that that's a bad type of grief, though. It's just different, right? But then there's the whole piece of, yes, you want to choose the thing that is going to bring you the most joy. But if that thing that brings you the most joy doesn't align with the story that somebody else close to you tells themselves about how life should quote unquote go, it takes the joy out of that in some ways, because then all you're met with is resistance, and you're met with judgment, and you're met with fear projected by the other person onto you. And yes, there's a certain amount of like realistic thinking that needs to go along with choosing to leave your corporate job and starting a business and like all the things, right? But it's so easy to say choose joy and be happy and find the joy in life. Like those are easy things to say. But what I've learned in my experience, they come with the hardest moments, and it comes with the most resistance, and it comes with the most amount of judgment. And especially in my divorce journey, took people years. People who were closest to me took them years to even begin to understand where I was coming from. And I didn't want to be the person, Chris, who was like, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. And let me prove to you why I'm right and you're wrong. I didn't want to be that person. And so it's so challenging to be in that state because you're like, I know this is the right thing for me, but everybody else is telling me why it's not. But then it's like you got to tune out that noise. But if you don't know how to do that, and if you're easily swayed by other people like me, I was very much that person, especially in that time of my life. If you're that person, it is so hard and it's exhausting. And it makes you feel like you're making all of the wrong choices. But then you learn to not trust yourself. You learn to that you don't have the answers. You learn that you can't actually do the thing when all of that is lies and it's all stories that you tell
Mhm.
yourself, right? So it's like this huge complex. It's like, yeah, yay, choose joy, and we love that. And my Happiness Happens podcast, we talk happiness all the time, but at what cost?
Yeah, I mean David Goggins made a video about two
Mm,
years ago, and I loved him for this one because it got a lot of back flack on and on Instagram. But long story short, he said, and what you were saying about how when we go through grief, we're always trying to meet someone's expectations, trying to prove ourselves, or trying to get them to see we're
mm-hmm.
right. And his biggest point he made that I love, and I share it with grievers in their right context, is that when you want to try to improve your life, people always have something to say all the time.
Oh,
When you fall backwards in life, by the way, they want you back down where they are so they can
mm,
feel this sense of control. And so they're going to have even more stuff to say. So it's going to become this question of how much do I let other people's expectations about how I'm supposed to grieve or how I'm supposed to feel or where I'm supposed to be in life or what I'm supposed to be doing? How much of that noise am I going to let back in my world once I go through something like
mm.
this? Because
Oh, so
I
true.
have the choice, I have the option, I have the power, I control that outcome. I can choose to let that stuff infiltrate me and try to become over here. But like Simona said, we're going to end up in Resistanceville over here. And that resistance, by the way, Sally's going to push us back in our alignment, by the way, because it's going to be like a slingshot effect. And so
Mm,
I try to tell people when they go through grief, if you're having to manage other people's emotions or manage what other people's expectations are about what you should be or thinking, all that stuff, you need to let it go somehow because the only person you should really care about and should feel for is yourself. You don't need to worry about the outside world. That will change in time.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I could not agree with you more. And, I think it's an active thing that you can do every single day. Come back home a little bit more to yourself every single day. And every moment where someone is pushing back on you, you choose yourself. And that's how you start to work on and flex and grow that muscle because it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, right? It's like some people will ask like, "Oh, how did you do that?" or "How did you get here?" or "How did you make that change?" And the reality is, but behind every choice is the decision. And you actually do get to decide everything that you want. It just may not look the same for each person. And it may come with different sets of challenges and different redirections and whatever the thing is, because we're not all meant to be here on the exact same journey, right? Everyone here is supposed to be on a different journey. But I kind of think, and I don't know, Chris, what you think about this, but I kind of think that even though we don't understand necessarily why we go through all the things that we go through, they are always for a reason and a purpose. And we get to look at that and we can fall into the line of thinking in like the trap of like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. And the doomsday, like all the horrible things that come with that. Or we also get the choice to look at it and be like, okay, even though this thing really sucks, what can I learn from this? How can I use this for good? In the podcasting world, especially what we're doing today, like every single time you use your voice, every single time you stand behind what you believe in, every single time you bring a message to the mic, okay, you have the choice and the power to add more good, or you have the choice and the power to add to more chaos. So it's what side do you want to be on with that? Do you want to be part of the good or do you want to be part of the chaos? Now, of course, that's nuanced too because everyone has their own opinion of what
Mhm.
is good and what is chaos and so on. But I think
Yeah.
that if you're a good person and you bring that goodness to the world, everyone falls short. Everyone has challenges. Everyone has days where they're not proud of themselves, right? Especially as you're navigating complex emotions and grief. There's a whole kind of emotions that come with that. But at the end of the day, you really do get to choose who and how you want to be and how you want to show up. You just do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad you brought that up because you're in podcasting, so I can feel free to say this on the show. I've recorded 122 episodes this year, by the way. This is
Wow.
my 124th, I think, that hasn't been released yet.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
But what's been really funny is though, is I've met people in the podcast community. They're like, "Oh my God, he's doing that many episodes in 9 months. I mean, that's insane. I'm not even there. Like, I gotta compare myself to that." Or I've had people do the opposite and say, "Oh, well, your episodes are too long, or your guests talk too much," and I start hearing all these negative things come out, and I sit there and say, I'm not going to take these things on because this is my podcast. This ain't your podcast. And on top of that, like you said about putting good out in the world, I don't care if my guests are perfect. I don't care if they navigated something better than somebody else. I don't care about those things. What I do care about is I have an authentic individual in front of me who's had a different
Mm,
experience and a different walk of life than me. They're seeing things from a place I will never see. And so they're sharing this with me in a very vulnerable and open space. And then I get to thinking in the next part, which is that somebody's going to listen to this podcast, is going to hear this guest, and they're going to hear their story and go, wow, you know what? I lived through something similar to that, or like, wow, I went through that same thing, but I never thought about it like that.
hmm
The fact that we can make conversations like that and teach each other on this journey we're on this experience, walking beside ourselves and not one-upping each other, I think is just the biggest gift we can put out in the world because we've got more compassion and empathy and gratitude and appreciation for ourselves. And that's the whole purpose of why I put my podcast together. It's not meant to be
hmm
perfect. It's not meant to be top number one besting. I don't care about that stuff. I care about all the people who never got a voice, all the people who never got support, a lot of people who never had a safe place to say, this is how I feel. I want this
hmm
to be your place. I want you to have that gift. And that gift will pay itself forward every day. And it's not even,
Absolutely.
like I said, it's not about comparison or who's better. It's the fact that we're just contributing good in the world by being authentically ourselves and showing a
hmm
little empathy towards one another in the crossfire.
1,000%. Absolutely. And in the podcasting world, of course, like there's a million and five best practices that anyone can do in any given moment. My Happiness Happens podcast was always born out of the mission to help one person feel less alone. And so at that time, and especially like even now, I don't really care of how is the show structured, or is my intro too long, or like I just I look at it and I'm just like, wow, like you know you have the opportunity to create something, and you're putting yourself out there, and you're doing something different to shift conversations for other people. You will never know the impact that your podcast has on people, because especially a show like this one in the topic of grief, people will reach out, some will reach out, but most won't. A lot of people won't, because people are hurting, and people are sad, and people are struggling. And it's not easy to admit to somebody else that you are hurting and sad and struggling, right? Those are not easy emotions, but you do make a difference with every single person that you bring on, because someone could listen to this episode today and be like, wow, this girl is absolutely cuckoo nuts bananas. Like, she's crazy. Like, I don't even know what she's talking about. But then somebody else could hear it and be like, oh, you know what? That's a really cool thought, and I'm going to adopt more of that in my life. But it's not for everyone. It's like that quote. I'm sure you've heard it. It says, you can be the I it always sticks out with me, or sticks out to me, but you can be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world, and still somebody won't like peaches.
That is so true.
You know what I mean? Like, God, like people
Yeah.
like to complain about everything. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just
Yeah,
so
that's
crazy.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too in the grief community a lot. Is I've heard a lot of opinions fly around, and I try to always encourage people to come back to, like you said, you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. You're not going to heal and grieve the way somebody else did.
Mm-hmm.
I've told people openly, I'm like, if you tried to grieve the way I do, I don't think that's going to work for you. I'm just gonna be very
Mm-hmm.
honest. You got to
It's
find
so
your
true.
own path, and that's where I love bringing on people with such diverse backgrounds. People from Canada. I talked to somebody in Australia this morning, 2 hours ago.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so when we talk to people in different cultures, different backgrounds, different belief systems, different parts of the world, it might be going through something we're not going through. We get to see grief in real time. And back to what
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about to start this podcast, grief is a mini series of things in our life that are redirections. That's really at the core, it can be looked at like that because somebody can look at you that got divorced and say, oh, well, she must not be able to have a relationship. Oh, she must have done this, or oh, he must have done that. Or we can sit there and say the opposite, by the way, which I like to see, is that, you know what? Somebody tried something and it didn't work out, but I bet you they figured out why it didn't work out and they're going to make
Mm-hmm.
something better next time. Or they're
It's
going to,
so true.
I see the place that somebody says, you know what? I didn't know what I wanted, but now I do. And now they're off. And that's where I sit there and say, you can look at all the negative and the bad like society loves to immerse themselves in, or you can go over here. It's a lot better, by the way, and say, you know what? That wasn't a mistake. That showed me what I needed to learn. That gave me a lesson, a blessing, or a
Mm-hmm.
gift. And I'm going to take that thing and make the next chapter of my life beautiful. And that's the
1000%.
opportunity our grief gives us.
Oh, it's so beautifully said. And I look back and I think, especially in the divorce part of my journey, like, it was not something that was easy, right? Choosing to end a marriage, and choosing to go out on your own, and choosing to quote unquote restart, which some people are like horrified at that idea. It's not all bad, you know? I would say definitely one thing that carried me through that whole time was doing interviews on my podcast. How do you sit in sadness and shame and all of those emotions all the time when you're interviewing people to understand what happiness means to them? It's like a paradox, you know? But I think it was even more challenging at that time because nothing bad happened. It wasn't, there was no abuse, there was no cheating, there was no like thing to blame. The only thing to blame was how much we had grown apart, and like how much I grew and how different I was. And the that forces you to face yourself. You have to come to terms with who you are as a person and the kind of life that you want to live. And then who do you want to be as you navigate through the rest of your life, and like what kind of journey are you going to go on? So it's really interesting because there's nowhere to place your grief, if that makes any sense. When people get divorced, and if there's usually a reason, like a quote unquote reason why, there's somewhere to put that anger. There's somewhere to put that fear or that shame or that guilt or whatever it is. But when there's nothing that's quote unquote horribly wrong, there's nowhere to put it. And people don't know what to do with it because you have this situation now, and there's just there's no place for it in society's bucket of divorce, you know? And so I don't know. I don't really know where else I'm going with that thought, but it's just really
That's
interesting to me because it's not like it's just so complex and it's so weaved in. And I had this client that I had worked with like before, whatever, doesn't really matter, but they like their own personal values were no divorce. And I'm like, I get that, but also how can you be judgmental? You have no idea what's going on in people's lives. You know, I'm of the
that's
belief,
fair.
right? Like I'm my own personal beliefs and will differ from somebody else, but I truly believe that you should never feel like you have to settle for your life. You have one shot at your life, and you should never feel like you have to settle. And, divorce is not something that's particularly welcomed in my family. Pretty much no one except for my parents are separated. You know what I mean? So, like, there's no one like in the
Yeah.
family that's like that. So, it's not really quote unquote welcomed, but um, the alternative for me of sitting unhappy for the rest of my life was just so overwhelming. I couldn't even imagine it. And I genuinely it's been like 3.5 years now at this point. Like I could not imagine my life like that. Like I just couldn't.
Well, see, that's the thing about grief and divorce. I'm glad we're talking about it, by the way. There's
Mhm.
stereotypes and stigmas around divorce and grief in general that are inherently wrong. Now, we could sit there and go to the Christian, Roman Catholic, biblical, whatever you want to call it. Those are
Yeah.
two things in my family, so pardon anybody if I offended.
Oh, my
My
family's Catholic also.
my they're gonna look at divorce and be like, "You're terrible. You're awful. Why'd you do that? That's against religion. That's against this." They're gonna come in those very harsh beliefs of things. But when we look at again, coming back to other perspectives, right? Like I talked about earlier, we can look at that a different way and say, maybe that wasn't meant to be. Maybe that was that. Maybe, by the way, this was a lesson, a gift, or a
Mhm.
blessing that may have had to happen. What if this was the moment, by the way, that I was in this hard place here and I'm in this great place now because that moment of life shifted me so hard in the other direction where I needed to be. And I really do feel like these things in life, they don't. I love Tony Robbins' phrase all the time. He says, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And that's very hard to see in the moment when you're going through massive emotions that are very, very
Yeah.
big, going through divorce, death of a child like me. That's hard to fucking see right there. But when you get through that time period, a certain amount of time, you start to see that and you start to go, wow, this is actually a gift. This isn't a bad thing. I'm not a bad person. I didn't,
Hmm.
I might have made a mistake, but that doesn't define me. That's not the end of
Yeah.
my journey. That's not my end all be all. I can learn from that. I can grow from that. I can do something with that. I can make better of myself. And when we take those opportunities to live there, that's where the joy and the happiness comes from. And that's why, I can say losing my son was a terrible tragedy. It really was. But I can also say, I wouldn't have this nice podcast that I have, my book I'm writing, my people I coach. I wouldn't have any of that had that not happened. And so I have to sit there and say, there was a much bigger purpose and meaning that I want to accept in that moment. And that's okay. Nothing wrong with it. I'm like everybody else. I'm not special. But I can sit there and say what I do every day is honoring and remembering that moment or that place where I'm looking back at my younger self and saying, I learned from that. And that was hard. That sucked. It was not fun. But it made me who I am today. And I can be nothing but
Hmm.
grateful for that. And that's a beautiful place to get because that's when the magical life happens.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know what, though, on the flip side, too, it's also okay if some days you're not that person. You know what I mean? It's also okay if some days you're like, you know what? This really sucks today. I
Mhm.
really would have loved this one specific thing because just because you learn how to coexist with your grief and move through it as part of your life, because it doesn't go away, it just transforms in your life and it kind of, I don't know, it kind of flows through with you just because of that like it it doesn't mean that you have to stay happy all the time and that you have to only be grateful all the time. Like you're allowed to sit in that moment of like, this really sucks right now. And, I wish I had my son and I wish, we did this thing and I wish we could also do this. And then also, too, in grief, leaning back on those skills and learning how to cope with those feelings and how to continue to move through and use that as another building block in the journey and in the fabric of what you are creating, right? I look back on my divorce, and especially in the last like couple of months, I've looked back on it and I'm like, oh my God, there's so many red flag things that I didn't notice at the time. And I look back and I'm like, when I was 23, I could have, there's specific moments in my life where I'm like, I could have just we could have broken up there and then like that would have been it. But that's not the journey. That is not the journey that was meant for me. Right. So I think to myself, especially I've been thinking a lot lately of like, I can't believe you did all of those things. And I can't believe that you treated me in this way. And also just knowing that it's not going to change anything. The anger that I have towards it comes up still, but it's not going to change anything. And I think, you just, I don't know if it's forgiveness, but I don't even know what it is because I'm still so irritated by so many pieces of it that I was so blind to before that pop up into your awareness afterwards. And I'm like, how could you? That's honestly like, how could you, after all of that, how could you put me through all of that? But then it's like, do I want to sit here as the victim and play that game? I'm not the person to go on social media and blast, my marriage and like all the things that happened and turn it into content and whatever. Some people have that as their outlet and that's great and that's fantastic for them. I'm not that person. I'm a pretty private person. I don't really share a whole lot about my life. And also, who do I need to convince that this thing, like, who am I convincing? You know what I mean? By
Yeah.
sharing this specific thing, like, who am I convincing, or what value is it bringing? Like, I go back to like, am I adding more good into the world, or am I adding more to the harder side of the world? And then, you of course can take that and reframe that into, okay, well, this is just part of the journey, and it's the journey that we're going to go through, and it just is what it is, and
You
that's
know,
it.
you hit something really good that I wish I could tell more people that, but
Hmm.
the fact that you still have angry parts about your divorce,
Hmm.
I love that part about you, and I love you for
And
being
I'm the
honest
one who
about
called
that.
it, though, Chris. I'm the one who
Yeah.
called the divorce, and I'm still angry about parts of it. You know what I mean?
And
Like, just because you're the person who initiated the thing doesn't exempt you from the emotions that come with it.
yeah, and do you know what that anger, by the way, is really for you, by the way? Do you know what it's for?
No, tell me.
It's so I've always learned on my journey that anger is the part of you that loves you the most. And what I try to frame it with people
Oh.
who have it is this is that version of you, whether you're 23 or 17 or 6 years old, whenever something happened in life, then that anger is real lingering there and hanging on. That's your younger version of yourself with something that happened in the past where you're in the same moment now. And when you
Hmm.
beat yourself up and say things like, I should have saw that, I knew better, I should have done different, I should have said something, that is not something identity wise for you. That's anger trying to communicate to you. And anger is always a
Hmm.
secondary emotion. And I tell people in grief all the time, and I'm glad you brought it up. You'll say, you know what? I still look back on that divorce and there are red flags I didn't see. That doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're broken. What this means is, by the way, anger is showing you how much you've grown. Anger is sitting there saying, hey, you learned from this over here. You know not to do this again. You know to look for this. Anger is your guide. It's trying to make sure it's protecting you. And so I try to encourage people when they get angry or they feel angry. And I like to say feel because you're not angry, you're not in your emotions, but you feel angry. What's it trying to tell you? What's it trying to communicate with you? Because if that thing does come up and say, I don't want to be treated like that again, or I have this boundary over here, I really didn't like this, that thing is telling you how to protect yourself. And so when you do run into those situations, by the way, and I catch myself doing this a lot lately, sometimes I start to go, okay, that's cute. I've been there, done that, seen it. I'm good. And I've learned how to give myself permission, by the way, to respond differently. But I use anger not to define myself. I use it as an awareness tool, something that says I need to shift or pivot because this isn't safe. So you gave a great example of that today, Simona. So I just want to say
Oh,
thank
I
you.
love that. Oh my gosh, no, thank you. I love that reframe so much because you're so right. Our emotions are there to protect us. They're here to show us things. They're here to identify different gaps. But you see how easy it is to go down that train of thinking. Like if I was talking to a friend, like I could have ranted on about that, like not on a podcast. Do you know what I mean? Like not something live. Like if I was talking to like a girlfriend behind closed doors or whatever, like I could have let that spiral for probably 45 minutes. Like it's so easy, right? Because there's no reframe. When you're in that moment and you're experiencing that emotion, it's so hard to pause yourself and to reframe it. And I, again, like I go back to like every single thing happens for you for a reason. So there's a reason why I brought that up. And there's a reason how you were able to reframe that for me so that next time that happens, you can catch it faster. And like that is how you start to heal, right? Like people always ask, like, what is the secret? How do you do the thing? Like, how, teach me the way. But sometimes it's literally just as simple as just taking a beat and just like taking a breath and taking a pause.
Yeah, it's you're reminding me of a situation I had really thick in grief. I got really
Mm.
there's a cross the cross that fell in the trees but across the street from my old house in New Hampshire. And I would talk to God out there all the time. Well, after I lost my son, I was really pissed at God for a lot of reasons, obviously. Anyway, I went down to get the mail one day and I was just really having an anger bomb light off. Like it was not a good one. And I threw rocks at this cross and cussed at it for a good 10, 15 minutes. I was just angry, flat out. And then I got to a place where I broke down and cried, and it went from angry to cry real fast. And what you said about taking a beat, I share this quick little story with you guys for a reason, is that when you're in grief, you can go from angry to crying sad in point two of a second. And that moment, by the way, that you make that shift, you are getting that shift out of anger because you're aligning back with yourself. You're getting right in here. The outside world doesn't exist anymore. And I want to encourage you guys in that moment, if you cry like I did, recognize you're being authentic with your inner self and listen to whatever comes out of here. Because when in that moment, you're not being blinded by emotion, you're not being blinded by outside influence, you're not being blinded by other things. You are fully present with yourself. And that part of you, by the way, will never, ever lie. It will never lead you wrong. I will tell you that. So I just want to encourage people to listen within themselves. There's a lot of power within ourselves that we don't always give attention to.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. I have nothing to add.
Well, Simona, I just want to say as we wrap up the podcast, this has been a very awesome episode because you brought a light to grief that I have yet to talk about on my show. And you
Oh,
put this in a lot of perspective for people to understand that grief isn't just one big giant moment in parts of our life, but it's little trickle moments there. And you reminded me, by the way, to reflect on things. My brain's been going there that these little moments of life weren't always bad. They weren't mistakes. They weren't negative things about us. They were parts that shifted us to where we're supposed to be. And they're part of our story and part of our journey, not something to tuck away or push away or get over, but something to move through and move forward with and realize that it helped shape us. So I just want to say thank you for your perspective on grief today. That was huge.
oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. And like, thank you so much for creating this space where people can come and they can share and don't feel judged for their perspective and their opinions and what they believe in and how they navigate through life and through grief. That's one thing that I felt instantly when you and I met the first time that we connected was, I was telling you my story, a story that a lot of times people can look at with a lot of judgment and a lot of lack of understanding. And you were like, wow, I never even considered to look at it that way. And I'll never forget that. Like, you literally met the story with the most amount of understanding. And that's a really powerful way to be. And so good for you for even being able to do that for other people because that's what drives the show and like everything else that you do. That's how you get into depth, that's how you get into true healing, and that's how you start to shift the conversation around these really hard topics. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's been a true honor to talk to as many people as I have and to hear so many beautiful stories. And on top of that, I will share every guest on my podcast, including yourself, has gone through something in life big and major that's shaped them and changed them into who they are today. And they're out there doing beautiful work in the world and serving from a very much higher place of gratitude, appreciation, and contribution. And I'm
Mm.
happy to say that as much as I appreciate your comments, it goes both ways for me because I'm grateful to feel that from you guys that come on the show. So I just want to say thank you so much for that. What I want to end the show with is if people want to connect with you and find you, where can they find you? And then on top of that, where can we listen to your podcast?
Yeah. Okay. So my podcast you can listen to on any podcast app or on YouTube. Happiness Happens is a show where I interview people to understand what happiness means to them. And I interview different researchers and thought leaders and authors and experts and consultants and whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's more to get into the nitty gritty, but I've had some incredible conversations on there. And the show's been on hiatus since 2024. 2024? Yeah, since 2024. But I am bringing it back in the new year. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to be super fun. And as it relates to podcasting, is a show about podcasting. So if you're interested in the podcasting world and learning more about that, feel free to check out that show. That's anywhere you get your podcasts. And on the business side, if you are interested in the podcasting stuff, voltproductions.co is my website. But honestly, Instagram is the easiest place to find me. It's at Simona with two underscores Costantini, and everything is linked from there. I'm happy to meet anyone, chat in the DMs, hear your thoughts or, questions or just chat. I love it. So please feel free to reach out.
Well, for all you guys listening today, I will have Simona's links in the show notes. When you guys get done with this episode, please go check her out on Instagram and connect with her. As you guys have heard today, she's a very beautiful woman who's gone through a lot in life, but she's given us this awesome perspective on grief. And I hope you guys enjoyed the episode today. And Simona, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Simona and I on today's episode of the Empowered Grief Journey. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from our story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you, visit empoweredgriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empowered Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know that you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.